Okay.
explore it live in that sense. Um, because so right now, like for example, where you just brought up the coherence and incoherence and how that relates to the ego. To me, that opens up a bunch of avenues in which where we can go to. So I'm excited about, instead of addressing the things that we've reviewed and done before, I'm excited about kind of diving into that and chopping that up and seeing what's there.
Yeah, because for me, that's kind of the direction I wanted to go to as well, was because when we're in a relationship and there's like trouble, we call
Mm,
it trouble, or it's rocky, it's that incoherence and disorder in the relationship. So it's the same concept that happens in life. And I think and this is why, like, when people break up and then they have some space to time in away from each other, and then they come back to each other, and then they kind of figure things out, right?
mm-hmm.
It's that space and time that you were able to give to build that awareness that allowed you to get away from incoherence and disorder and then move more to coherence. But the thing is, when the work is not done with the ego,
Mm-hmm.
where like some of the things we talked about is taking responsibility in whether your ego is trying to be right or effective.
Yeah.
For me, like when it comes to relationships, it's almost been there. It's almost been, that's like my go-to now. It's like, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Yeah.
But then it's like, how do both players and both teams start working in that space as well?
Side note, are you on the Wi-Fi over there, or are you on your network?
No, on Wi-Fi
You know, you want to try switching it, see if
from
because
the
right
phone.
now, yeah, because you keep cutting out, keeps from your feed.
Okay.
Let's see if that makes it better. Um, what does it say on your end right now?
It's got you frozen.
Right now, yours is loading as if you're not connected. So, probably trying to find a connection. Just make sure that you stay on.
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Okay, so I'm sorry. You said, what was the last thing you said?
I said what I keep coming back down to is that's phrase that your wife says, do you want to be effective or do you want to be right? And I think when it comes to coherence in a relationship, I think that's like, I don't know, I'm starting to see it as like a golden rule to check ego, to put ego in check
Hmm.
so that you can create coherence.
Hmm.
But then is how do we know that the other partner is
Hmm.
effectively trying to put that rule into place as well and is putting their ego on check? And how do you know that you aren't falling into a state of, how do we give people tools where you're not falling into a state where you're being passive and just trying to hold the relationship up to make it survive or exist, right?
Hmm.
Because I
Yeah.
think when you're in that like disorder and incoherent space, you're trying to do anything to make it work.
Yeah. I see that. Um, hmm. So to explore the boundaries of this, I think that everything that we always talk about starts with that awareness, right? So I've been looking at this like in today's meditation. A lot of what we spoke about yesterday kind of came up, and what I started to envision is the awareness and the vulnerability and the ego, like almost like the Three Musketeers in a way of, so the ego is standing there. It's like the shield that's blocking and protecting and doing all of that, while awareness is the action of taking that realization of what's going on. Finally, vulnerability is the ego stepping down, stepping to the side or laying down and leaving the true you there
Mhm.
to express and explore. So when it comes to kind of the relationship idea here of what the concept is with in regards to that you want to be right or effective, right? To be effective, that ego needs to lay down. So I envision this scenario, right? I envision, so with me, little background is growing up, I used to be very angry, right? I love to fight. I, like, I can't stress enough how much I love to fight. And I'm not talking about fighting for the sake of beating someone. Like me getting hit was just as good as me hitting. Um, and the reason why I bring that up right now is because that's where I can kind of connect most, where my ego can step up with another man, for example, um, easily say I walk into a store and make eye contact with someone, and you know, men right away kind of get this like aggressive energy, kind of like two dogs locking eyes with each other. Um, and right away that can trigger kind of that egoic response of like, oh, this guy's disrespecting me, how dare he. And for me, playing out that scenario is one of the more powerful ways to realize how to become vulnerable in that event. And what I kind of reflected on was the following: if I'm able to take that space of where that initial reaction, that trigger gets clicked on, and I'm able to view the situation and really lay down my ego, then that allows me to, from my true self, kind of connect with that person, with that individual through his eyes, and truly see beyond his ego, truly see his reality. And right away from that, I can communicate with him. Instead of communicating from ego to ego, I can communicate from self to internal self directly. And to me, that's a powerful thing. So then when we bring it to relationships, if you're able to do that with your partner, or you practice doing that with your partner, that means that you can read the truth inside of them. You can express your truth inside of you without the confrontation, without that diving in of, oh, wait, I got to protect myself because you disrespected me, and go into reality, go into the truth of, hey, I'm feeling you right now are upset, and it's not to do with any of this right now. There's something else weighing you down. If I can say that to my partner, right? Number one, if she's someone that's open and aware, and my partner is someone that I choose, so therefore I would expect them to be working on themselves the same way I work on myself, therefore being aware. So if I say that to my partner, right away, I'm taking the conversation to a place of exploration rather than confrontation. And that exploration now invites my own exploration as well. So we can go into this journey together to explore what we're actually feeling, and what the ego is trying to protect.
Mm.
Did any of that make sense?
It makes sense. And it made me come back to thinking about it. For some reason, it made me think this, like, you know how they say, like, you got to be happy with yourself
Hmm.
and understand yourself before you're able to get into a relationship and understand someone else.
Yeah.
And the more we, like, the way that you described it, it made sense that way because, like, for someone to be able, what you were talking about essentially is empathy, right?
Hmm.
So to build empathy, right? We were talking about this with our team and stuff like that. To build empathy, you need awareness and you need vulnerability,
Hmm.
right? So if you're in a relationship and you're not able to empathize, we would think, right? Like if we would put this in mathematical terms, if you're not able to empathize, therefore you're missing one or the other. Awareness, you're missing awareness or vulnerability, or you're missing both.
Hmm.
And in my experience, I think the reason that my relationships have not been successful have been because I was not able to empathize. Because, for example, even when I played the victim and I was afraid of losing the relationship, that too, that anxiety that I felt from losing the relationship was an ego based reaction, right? That lacked awareness and vulnerability, that didn't allow me to empathize and see where the other person was coming from.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, I only saw what they saw and thought that I was wrong. So I neglected self, therefore, only trying to make the relationship work. So it can go vice versa, where I think if you don't have that, like you put it in a way where you said ego was the one that protects, right? Awareness is the one that kind of has that eye view and is telling you what's going on. And then vulnerability is telling you where your weaknesses are and what you need to kind of look at to protect. If you don't have those three components in there, right? So for me, my ego wasn't there. I felt like my ego in relationships wasn't protecting me at this point. I might have seen awareness, but I wasn't being vulnerable enough with myself to say, like, hey, this person is not necessarily good for me, or this person is not the person that I want in my life. And I put ego to the side because I was more afraid. Ego was more afraid of being hurt and losing something, the fear of loss, than to be able to protect what's truly important, and that is self. So now I'm thinking like maybe we should design something where it's like the the pre what do you call it? Like the prerequisites to a relationship,
Mm.
right? Like a program that basically gets you ready to be in a relationship. Because like being in a relationship is also making a decision that you want to commit to somebody.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people like the idea of commitment.
But like a escape plan.
Yes, but like a plan B, right?
Hmm.
They like the idea of commitment, but when it comes to like push the like when it comes to
Push comes to shove.
yeah, push comes to what?
Shove.
Push comes to shove, nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to commit. And even me to a point was like essentially I keep asking myself, was I even ready to commit?
Hmm.
Like was that at a point that I was ready to commit? And in my previous relationships where I did commit, was I truly committed to it?
Yeah.
Right? How do we understand that? So like I think that's a pretty interesting like idea to kind of to explore.
Another point that I just thought about as you were saying that is the concept of expectations.
Mm,
And in a relationship, there's a big level of that, of the expectation. And I'm not sure if this is in terms of related to ego, we can explore that. But the expectation, most of the time, when we're let down by someone else, is because that person didn't meet the expectation we had for them, right?
hmm
So if the person says a thing that triggers us, or the person um, does a thing that disappoints us, it really falls from that expectation, that buildup that we just created in terms of, I didn't expect, or I did expect you to be here, but you showed up down here, and now I'm upset,
hmm
right? And I think of this from the perspective of my children, right? I was just talking to a client today, and we're talking about the idea of how with my kids, my daughter's 5, my son is 7, right? Because my son is 7, I automatically have these higher expectations. So my two kids can do the exact same thing, and my reaction is very different to them.
Pretty messed up, bro.
It is, right? It is when you view it like from a distance, right? When you become aware of it. But the reality is that that happens, and if you're unaware of it, unable to see it, then you just continue in perpetuity creating that over and over and over as time passes.
Hmm.
So this made me think of when I was speaking to my client about like the expectation that we have with the other person. If we're expecting them to be a 7-year-old, right, and they show up as a 5-year-old, that disappoints us. But this is all us. This is all internal. This is all me
Hmm.
that's creating all of these. I'm I think it's kind of brutal when you think about it. I expect that you behave this way and that way. And if you don't, I'm going to be very disappointed in you.
Hmm.
Right? Like,
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. It's pretty unfair too. It's super unfair.
yeah.
I,
So, um, tying it back to like a relationship, if I'm in this with someone and I'm building up all these expectations because here's the point is like I mentioned about my kids is like just because my son is 7, no other reason. He's 7, so these are the expectations that he should meet. Same thing with a partnership. So and this is where I think we can get into a discussion because I don't think the expectations themselves are wrong and bad because to a certain extent expectations are necessary to create dependence on each other, right? And dependence can also be seen as wrong if you see it as like, oh, I'm gonna be independent. But if you're truly committing to someone, going back to that point, if you're truly committing to someone, you're you're sharing, you're willing to go in to share and lift that your lives together basically. So there has to be a mutual dependence in which you're carrying something together, because if we're carrying a big ass heavy weight, I should have expectations of you to carry the other side, but
mhm.
only if you come to agree to that point.
Commitment.
Yeah, exactly, right? But on the flip side, if I have expectations of you to behave like my wife or like my girlfriend based on my own stories, based on what I've read and the stories I've heard and the people I've seen, this is how women should behave with their husbands, and I'm putting that on you, that's fucked up.
It is pretty fucked up. So now I'm thinking like essential ingredients to making a successful relationship, right? One of them is commitment. The other one is awareness, right? Vulnerability, and then expectations. I think that's a great point is being aware of expectations because even when you're looking for someone, um, you are expecting even the idea, the fantasy of the dream person that you're looking for, right, is unfair to yourself. And then when you meet this dream person that you fall in love with, and then you place these expectations that you created on that person that you fell in love with, and then that person fails to meet your expectations,
Mhm.
then you just destroyed yourself. Like
Mhm.
the other person had nothing to do with it. And it's not only
Yes.
unfair to someone else, but it's also unfair to you because it's like your own happiness that you're destroying and not really seeing somebody for who they really are in that point. So I think like those are some essential ingredients like commitment, awareness, vulnerability, and expectations is definitely one that I think somebody has to understand, and awareness of expectations because like you said, expectations are neither good or bad. I think they're natural for us to have as human beings. Uh, but being aware of them, I think, is more important than anything else.
Yeah. Um, so what do you think in regards to all of that and the ego?
So I think that hmm, that's interesting. So I think expectations are a way that we communicate to ego in what allows our survival with a partner. So I feel like expectations in a partner, this idea that we expect in a partner, this partner that we create, is the ego calling for a teammate that will allow survival of self. And I think when we lack the awareness to see that the ego is creating this,
Mhm.
right? This team member, this ideal team member, which is neither good or bad,
Mhm.
but neither is it true because we're ever evolving human beings and we're always changing. I think that is what, if we can understand that the ego is creating these expectations, is setting these guidelines into what a partner should look like and what we should expect from someone,
Mhm.
then we should be able to see that if we can understand that, then ego is the source for any miscommunication that happens. Because if there's an expectation that isn't being met, that is your ego getting in the way of allowing you to communicate truth. Because the only thing that you see is what the ego sees. And that's the expectations created in this ideal partner that only allows, that will be this expectation is the only way that we will survive, that
Mhm.
self will survive in this relationship. Otherwise, you're no good and you need to go. You need to leave.
Next.
Next,
Mhm.
right? And I think like that is how I would connect it because expectations is what the ego creates as the ideal teammate.
Mhm.
In reality, ego doesn't understand that the only teammate there really is self.
So I wanna dive into that a little bit more because the like basically what you described with teammate and all of that made me think of projections, right? So the ego projecting a compatible ego
Hmm.
that supports itself,
Yeah.
right? So basically, it's this silhouette that, like a puzzle piece, that someone needs to warp themselves and fit into to be checked off as like, okay, you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically.
Yeah, I like that idea. Um, in terms of the projection of
And
the
I mean,
ego.
yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. What I think something becomes wrong is when you lack the awareness that you're actually doing this.
Mhm.
When you understand that you are projecting without understanding that you are projecting.
Yeah, because it goes back to what we discussed not yesterday, last week I think it was, with responsibility, right? Because that's removing, with lack of awareness, that's removing the responsibility of the situation, right? That's now placing the responsibility on that other person to fit your mold,
Yeah,
right?
and that's why we hear so many people say like, "Oh, that person wasn't for me," or "We weren't compatible," or "It just wasn't going to work." That's bullshit.
Hmm.
That's bullshit. Those are your projections that didn't work. Those are your
Hmm.
expectations that didn't work, right? And vice versa, it could be the other person too.
Oh shit, I just thought of something. So I just thought of like the flip side of it. So I've seen a lot of relationships where one person starts the relationship, and actually, you know what, um the a relationship coming together, one person setting expectations like, hey, this is not, I'm not looking for a relationship or whatever, or on another tone is, I just want to let you know that I'm this way and that way and that way, right? This is what I'm coming with, right? Being real upfront with your expectations, like, okay, that's cool. And then the other person having a secret agenda of, I'm gonna fix you. Right? So
Yeah.
like 2 points here of like, this person I'm going to fix you, and this person, with all these projections of expectations, right? Let's
Hmm.
break that down, because I feel like that I've seen that a lot.
I've been on both spectrums of that. I've been on both ends of that one where, I've been with a woman and, I saw there were, weaknesses in our relationship and, her character, my character. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna give you all the information you need in order to be from this egoic standpoint, on the same level as me, the same wavelength. So we think the same, because if we think the same, then we're gonna work because our mental models are the same. Right. And then I've also been on that other spectrum where, I met a girl and I was like, you know what, I'm not really interested. Like, I'm not going for anything serious and da 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 da. But in reality, that's an expectation as well.
Hmm.
Um, where I think, like, when you go into a relationship, like, we can't project the future of it. We can't project what's going to actually happen. So when you start setting expectations, what you're really doing is taking yourself out of the present moment
Into the future.
and into the future, which doesn't really allow you to truly enjoy the person for who they are.
Yep.
And that's like for me, if I think about it, all those times, that's an atrocity. It's an atrocity to myself and to the other person, because we really didn't truly get to know each other in the way that, like, you could if you really love somebody. Like, when you really truly love somebody and accept somebody for who they are, you can actually enjoy them a lot more, like 10 times more. Go back.
So rewind. This is goes back to that imagery that I saw in my meditation, right? If the two egos meet, basically what you just said is like, we didn't get to know each other. Your egos got to know each other,
Hmm.
but their true
Exactly.
selves behind never got to meet.
Yeah, never. So, like, most breakups, when most people break up, it's because they never really got to meet. They never really got to meet. And man, it's really deep where we're going. It's really deep where we're going, because a lot of people say, like, oh, that person's never going to change, and that person's going to be the way they are forever and ever. And, like, for me, I don't believe that.
Of
Like,
course
that's
not.
such a hard concept to believe, that people are the way they are. People are the way they are because they're deciding to be that way, or they
They
lack the
rehearse they
awareness.
rehearse it every single
They
morning,
rehearse it.
every single day, and so therefore they make sure that they stay there. But it takes effort to remain the way you are, just like it takes effort to become something new.
Exactly. So then when we go about relationships and people say that, like, they're never going to change, I was like, well, neither did you. Well, did you change? Did you show your true self?
Hmm.
So then most relationships that fail were never a relationship. It was
Hmm.
never a real true relationship. It was a, like, hmm,
Which locks back down to the commitment point,
exactly.
right? So, because I just had the thought of, so with the client I was speaking to earlier, we were talking about relationship, but not um, romantic relationship, more family relationship, in which commitment is taken care of. You're locked in,
You're locked in.
right?
Yeah.
Right? There's no choice with that. I mean, you can,
For the most part, you're locked in.
yeah,
Yeah.
but kind of that commitment is already taken care of in that sense. So it's like you have to figure out how to work this out, right?
Mhm.
And that's what made me think of, is like, that's the plan B that most people have. Oh, this relationship doesn't work out, I'm leaving, right? But to be truly committed with someone, like, once you decide that you're going to commit, right, from both ends, and you kind of connect that chain link, like, all right, we're together now, we're doing this together, then what that requires of you is, and this goes into what I was talking with my client about, this goes into now you figuring out how to make this work. And it's not by changing them, it's by you developing self. If you develop self, going back into the expectations as well, You develop self and you become aware of self and be like, wow, I'm projecting these expectations of this individual here. What needs to change is me.
Yeah.
That person doesn't need to change. So that idea of like, oh, they're never going to change. They don't have to change. That's their journey. Even if you're in a relationship together, what needs to change is you, right? And obviously, all of this is talking about a relationship, a mutual relationship, because it just made me think of someone brought up yesterday about um, the the concept of like abuse and everything like that. Um, so, sorry, someone wrote on
That's all right.
it. So the idea that if we're moving forward together, it's because we both have this kind of vision of what we're going to create. So in that sense of not even a vision, I want to say change that to mission, right? Because vision is that projection of the future, right? What we expect to come to, and mission is kind of like what we stand for,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we're together and we have a mission together, a mission that connects us in our journey, then what we're doing here is building together for this mission that's greater than us as individuals,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the first foundational piece. Then along with that is then creating, or not creating, or rather becoming self-aware of your expectations and being able to mold and adjust those expectations based on that root of that mission.
Mm. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense. I like the part about the mission. So now this brings me to one question that we still haven't discussed, which I think would be a great topic for discussion in our next relationships personal development class. Um, Sex.
Mm,
How does sex change a relationship? How does, so you talked about the families, right? Like you're committed, you're locked in, right? But the dynamics of those relationships are that there is no romantic interaction, so therefore there's no sex. So sex now especially can be a very powerful tool to make relationships go in either direction,
mhm,
in failure or incoherence and disorder and coherence.
mhm.
So what do you think sex, what role do you think sex plays that can elevate the ego to come out and be there and protect, or allow the ego to come in? And I think I kind of already know where you might be going with this, but I'm going to let you talk.
So sex, and I'll go from my standpoint. Sex is the ultimate practice of vulnerability.
I knew it.
And so like with clients, this has been a topic that we talk about as well. And I've seen it from two sides, right? I'll say three sides because I'm gonna count my own side from it. One side is sex as the only link, sex as just a experience between two people of a good feelings, right? At this point, we're talking about almost like an addiction to that feeling, right? Where it becomes very self perpetuated, very self pleasuring for the purpose of me is the only reasoning for this, right? I've seen that from two ends. From the person that is for their own pleasure, and a lot of anchors with that in terms of anchors from the side of, oh, but this is fundamental, this is natural, all of those things. And I've seen it from the other side of the person being, I guess I could say, like the victim of this as well, meaning their partner is the one that's just self-pleasuring, and they're just
There.
kind of. Mhm.
Yeah.
um and then on the other end, which is the not having any sex, right? The not having sex because of, I don't want, because means like I'm describing the exact reason, right? But what I mean is the overall projections of that vulnerability and fear of that vulnerability, because it's not a space where you feel safe.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about exactly, because I talked about it in my podcast, how sex played a huge role in my understanding of self.
Hmm.
And is the ultimate form of vulnerability, which was something I wasn't comfortable doing, which I think led to a lot of the heartbreak that I had in my life. Because it was this idea of trying to connect with somebody without really having to truly be vulnerable. And sex is like, so this is why I think some people view sex as just a self-pleasuring act, where it's, if I view sex as this self-pleasuring act where it doesn't require me being connected to somebody, therefore I don't have to be vulnerable, right? Yeah, I'm vulnerable in the physical realm, but when it terms like, I've had sex that was just purely sex, and then I've had sex that felt like love and like true connection, right? So I think when you feel that true connection, or where it's just like, I don't know, like this crazy intimate sex, is because you're your ultimate form of vulnerability.
Hmm.
And I, for a long time, I had that problem because of the vulnerability aspect. So it was like showing myself and just understanding myself and putting myself out there didn't really allow me to be vulnerable. So came from this ego of always trying to protect this version of who I am at that time. Um, and then as I got older, then it became more, as I got more comfortable with me and sex in general, then I understood that um, it was about self pleasure. But whenever I went down that route and I actually got to learn about the person, it never went that way, because me in general, as like, I think you can relate, is like, we like to know people. We like to get to understand people. We like to be vulnerable. And when you go and you create that connection with somebody else, it's hard to come from a place of just self pleasure when
Yeah.
you actually have a deep connection with someone.
So I actually was thinking about that as you were talking, because so my wife and I have been together since we were 16, right? So I don't have that many sexual partners, but I had a few before. And I had a one night stand, and yes, that young. And I remember feeling so gross, so disgusting by this. And to me, it becomes that point that you just mentioned of, I'm seeking deep connection. I'm seeking all of that. And to be kind of that shallow with something so vulnerable did not vibe well with me.
No, I had the same experience one time when I went. I had just gotten out of a breakup, and I went to San Diego for a trip, and I had a one night stand, and that was the first time I ever had a one night stand, and I felt like a horrible human being.
Hmm.
I just felt like a horrible human being. I don't think, like, I don't want to judge anybody out there that does one night stands. Whatever, that's your thing. That's your thing. But for me, the fact that like every person that I've encountered and I've had any type of relationship with, it's gotten to a point where I was able to even in a friendship, I was able to understand them and know more about their vulnerability, their insecurities. And for me to meet a woman, and usually on the first date, I'll be able to talk about some of their vulnerabilities, some of their things. We'll get close.
Mhm.
And for me to have sex with them on that same date after knowing what I know,
Mhm.
and then ripping that connection apart, like that's hard, man.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And I just felt like a horrible human being too. So I
Yeah.
never went down that route again after that.
Yeah. So um I think kind of the representation there, like you said, like not to judge anyone um out there that enjoys one night stand. I think the part that we're trying not to judge is their enjoyment of that, right? Because
Yeah.
you can enjoy the pleasure, right? There's nothing wrong with simply enjoying the pleasure. What we're talking about is the intimacy, right? That leads to
A
you being able,
relationship.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key difference here. And in order to, this loops all the way back to what we're talking about, because we're talking about relationships here, and this is all kind of the self-relevance work that you do within yourself, all that work that you do within yourself, and that's how you're able to develop and build a relationship,
Hmm.
right? And if you're talking about one night stands for whatever reason, you're not looking to build a relationship, right? That seed isn't planted yet within you, right? um and there could be many reasons for it, even beyond my understanding, but that part, that aspect, I can give a bunch of like positive points of that. um for one instance, like we talked about, that personal pleasure, self-exploration in that field, in that realm, right? Self-exploration of your body and of your desires and everything like that. There's a lot of like things that could happen there. But once you're in the realm of relationship, I think that it becomes a whole different ballgame, right? And in, because we started talking about this sex in a relationship. So in a relationship, that's when I think all of the stuff that we're talking about makes sense. When you're willing to be to that level of vulnerability, to that level of self-awareness and connection, that's when sex becomes a powerful tool to as a foundation for your relationship.
Yeah, I think so. It's like what allows you to practice the connection between you two in the physical realm. That's essentially what it is the practice of maintaining, like hardwiring that connection.
Hmm.
I'm sure there are studies. I mean, if we go and look, I'm sure there's studies in terms of like chemicals that bond people together. There's a way that human beings connect
Yeah.
on, yeah, on a, on energy,
Oxytocin, serotonin.
oxytocin, yeah, all those things. So it just shows how how sex is a powerful tool in establishing a deeper connection.
Hmm.
And I think if you can practice sex in that form, is when you allow yourself to get to a you allow yourself to get into a deeper relationship. Like, I think, I don't know, I think that part of me cannot view sex in that way, as like a self pleasure. And one, because it's like deeper, like the deep connections that I establish with my partners. But I also think it's like the form of practicing sex in a state of self pleasuring can lead to an addictive state where it's kind of like food, right? Like you might you might enjoy good food, right? And you might enjoy it for self pleasuring, right? But then, when it comes to taking care of your body and being healthy, you have not practiced the habits of eating healthy foods. You
Yeah, I
practice
think
the habits of
that's a
eating
perfect
cheese.
analogy because it's like the concept of a foodie, right?
Hmm.
Um, where it becomes this attachment to the food for self pleasure aside of uh, self torture, right?
Yeah.
Is something, and again, to me, that ties back in what I said before with addiction, right? If something is being addicted to something is the concept of doing something, even if it's causing you harm, doing it over and over and over again,
Yeah.
right? So in this case, when it comes to sex, causing yourself harm, there's a lot of levels that you can discuss with that, but um, it's doing something that you're not in the realm of self-development where you're not developing, you're just going for that, the tip of the iceberg, which is the pleasure, right?
Hmm.
The pleasure in that physical level,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
um yeah.
All right. So, I mean, we should probably cut it off here because we're coming to the end of time. But I mean, I think that was a pretty good conversation, exploration of relationships and sex, and I think it's a great topic to kind of bring up in our next relationship, PD.
Mhm.
Yeah.
um yeah, and then having my wife here, I
Yeah.
think
That'd be
would
cool.
be,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Let's go with that. All right. So we'll end it here. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Project Podcast.
Awesome.